NDP MP and ethics critic Charlie Angus. Welcome, Mr. Angus. Appreciate your time.
Thank you so much for having me, Angie.
I want to get what's going through your mind right now as you heard what the Prime Minister said there.
I feel like it's Groundhog Day. We've seen so many instances where the Prime Minister gets caught, says he seems outraged that anyone could question him. Then as the scandal deepens, then he apologizes as though he was somehow impolite at a dinner table conversation, and that makes everything okay. This isn't about the Prime Minister being impolite. This is about the Prime Minister not accepting that the law of the land applies to him in terms of the Conflict of Interest Act, the obvious apparent conflicts with his family being paid by we're staring him in the face. But what concerns me even more, because we see the Prime Minister has this sense of ethical permissiveness in what he does, why nobody around him, his chief of staff, the clerk of the Privy Council, why nobody else flagged that this was going to be a really obvious problem for him?
As the Ethics Commissioner probe potentially gets underway here, do you anticipate something more will be uncovered into all of this?
I think we've learned a lot that's raised many questions, certainly with the organization and their capacity or lack of capacity to handle this program has raised questions about whether the Prime Minister's claim that this was an idea that came from the civil service, the fact that his family members were being paid and very well paid by when we find that other high-profile ambassadors of the organization were being told to act as volunteers. There was a financial relationship between Trudeau's and and I think part of the bigger question is that this is the third time the Prime Minister's been under investigation. Mm-hmm. Why is it that nothing has been done in his office to change the operating procedures? After the first finding of guilt, it would have been expected that Gerry Butts at the time and Katie Telford would have put some regulations in. After the second finding of guilt, Gerry Butts had to go for the high jump, his right hand. The clerk of the Privy Council had to resign, something that's never happened before. And now we're into the third investigation. So, you know, I'm hoping to bring to our ethics committee an investigation into why there are no standards and procedures in the Prime Minister's office to curb this culture of ethical permissiveness that the Prime Minister seems to indulge himself in.
Having said that, then, what do you want to come out of this? Do you think now there has to be a full list of checks and balances or a full-on review on how things are managed and decisions are being made in the government there?
Well, this is a scandal that should never have happened. It's I would think certainly will rate as one of the stupidest scandals in Canadian history that it even got to first base. And if we'd had basic standards in place, like the professional civil service and professional staff around the Prime Minister, making sure that the Conflict of Interest Act was paid attention to or at least known about, we wouldn't have been in that. So we need to have that in place to deal with the future. But I'm also really frustrated because, again, it's the pity show for Justin and his family. This was emergency money that was badly needed by post-secondary students. An enormous amount of work had been done by the civil service through Canada Summer Jobs, asking the help of MPs from across the country to identify opportunities for students. All that was stopped and shelved, and the money was given to we. Now nothing's happening. The summer's moving towards the halfway part. I am really frustrated the Prime Minister hasn't shown leadership, said, yeah, we blew it. We will get that money out the door right away. We will turn it over to the civil service through Canada Summer Jobs and get students hired. We have university students, postgraduates, people with huge levels of debt who've been completely blown out of the water by this debacle. And I'm wondering why the Prime Minister is not showing some leadership to make up for the damage he's done.
Yeah, well, I mean, he did say that they are going to be looking at measures that need to be taken in order to sort of, bring that back in some shape or form. I want to ask you about Bill Morneau. I know that you're asking for the Ethics Commissioner to also look into his practices as well, not recusing himself from that meeting, from that decision. Morneau coming back and talking about, in a press release, saying his two daughters, one who's employed by we and the other who was at a speaking event, didn't receive any compensation for it. Do you accept what Morneau was saying on this and are satisfied?
Again, I don't think our finance minister understands that the law of the land applies to him. Any of the viewers who've been involved in school board politics, small town municipal politics, any kind of public board knows about the obligations to recuse oneself in conflicts of interest. And certainly I was on a small town school board, and our conflict of interest guidelines were very stringent. The fact that the finance minister sitting at a cabinet table where his daughter is employed by a company that's being, where contract is being outsourced to, and doesn't recuse himself, and doesn't think that that's a problem, well, that's a real problem. That certainly is, to me, is a prima facie contravention of the Conflict of Interest Act, but it's also a contravention of common sense. So this is not about the work his daughters were doing. They could be doing fantastic work. I commend them. This is about the family connection and the obligation under most basic conflict of interest recusal obligations to say, hey, guys, I better step out of this because of my family connections. It seems that this is like the family compact around the Trudeau cabinet, and that's why they get themselves into trouble again and again and again.
Before I let you go, do you think the Prime Minister should step aside during all of this?
Well, we are in the midst of a unprecedented pandemic. I guess what I'm feeling is a great disappointment that the Prime Minister, with the enormous amounts of money going out the door, thought, well, maybe we can, give some of this to friends and people we're close to. I think he blew it, but I think he needs to pick it up, show some leadership, get this money happening, and then we need to investigate why the Prime Minister keeps having these lapses in judgment. But we have to stay focused right now. This is an unprecedented time. It's just the Prime Minister really let us down at this moment.
NDP ethics critic Charlie Angus, great having you on the show. Mr. Angus, thank you for this.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome.